My name is Voza Rivers, and I'm a son of Harlem.
I first met Mr. Rivers, who's now in his late 70s, back when I was a young reporter covering Harlem. He's a giant in the arts. He's a theater director and a documentary filmmaker with a list of awards a mile long. And he was born and raised in Harlem. Mr. Rivers got into theater in the 60s. He met a man named Roger Furman in a public speaking course.
Here's this guy, and he was a member of the American Negro Theater. And when he mentioned the people who were all there with him, I said, oh my God, this is something. And at the end of his lecture, he said, listen, I want to keep the foundation of what I learned at the American Negro Theater in a new theater company that I'm creating.
That theater company is the New Heritage Theater Group. Today, it's the oldest Black nonprofit theater company in New York City. 60 years ago, Voza Rivers was just a young guy who hung around and helped out.
People from the American Negro Theater who were his friends, Abram Hill, came by to endorse what Roger was doing.
Mr. Rivers worked his way up from a volunteer who cleaned bathrooms and ran errands to business manager. And after Roger Furman died, Mr. Rivers took over.
The first tribute I would do in Roger's memory was to call Abram Hill to get permission for me to do Strivers Row in 1984.
On Strivers Row, the Ants' first big hit, the one we heard about earlier, written by Abram Hill.
So I sat with Abram Hill. Now, I've never produced anything up until that point. And now here I am taking on this major production.
But you've been practicing, you've been training, waiting in the wings though, right?
Waiting in the wings.
So you actually had Mr. Hills there with you, helping to shape this thing. What was it like actually working with him?
Well, he gave notes and you listened. I want to change the setting. I want to change the lighting. This is the kind of costume that I want the costume designer to dress people in.
What was his personality like in his voice? How did he carry himself?
Every time I was in his presence, I always thought that I was around a professor at a college because that's the kind of stature that he held. He was a very conservative guy, always in a suit. Never saw him without his suit and tie on.
Never once.
He was dapper. He held up that tradition of what esteemed Black men during that period would look like. Everything about him was very serious. Not only did Abram Hill talk about the fundamentals of theater, he also talked about the responsibility of being advocates for our culture, to also articulate and advance the Black movement in arts and culture and in civil rights.
Mr. Rivers decided to follow the example set by Abram Hill.
The first thing that I knew was I had to have a commitment to the community. Most of my work was done and there was no admission at all. Wow. We just wanted our people to come in, see themselves reflected, laugh, learn history, because I felt that we had the obligation of making our founding theater companies proud. So from day one, after I did Strivers Row, I knew I had to get the best director, best set designer, because Roger had it and Abram Hill had it. So I had a lot to live up to. We knew and we understood the history and the foundation and the obligation that we had to keep the memory and the history correct about whose shoulders we stand on.
Today, Voza Rivers remains the executive producer of the New Heritage Theater Group. The group has produced dozens and dozens of plays in Harlem and all across the world. But not long after his first production, Mr. Rivers lost touch with Abram Hill. When was the last time you talked to Mr. Hill before he passed?
when I did our version of On Strivers Row. So we're talking about 1984. Shortly after that, we didn't see Abe Hill. I think he was dealing with his own health challenges and the fact that people didn't remember him.
Wow, I wonder if that must have been tough, obviously. I mean, he played such a foundational role and they just didn't know who he was.
They didn't remember him.
Abram Hill died in 1986. He had been suffering from emphysema. He was 76 years old. His service was held at Riverside Church, just at the border of Harlem and the Upper West Side. Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis spoke. Sidney Poitier and Frederick O'Neill were honorary pallbearers, and Alice Childress read Hill's obituary. The program for his memorial service reads, quote, "He was delighted to see the revival of Strivers Row." There's a strong legacy of Black theater that has grown from the foundation of Hill and the Ant.
National Black Theater, Barbara Ann Tear, they are now 50 years old. Woody King, New Federal Theater, is still going strong, 50 years old. My theater company, 56 years old. And I'm so proud when I go to the Schomburg and I see that there's an American Negro Theater still with the small stage active in the Schomburg, so that others could understand the importance of what the American Negro Theater meant to Black theater.
Why do you think it is that, largely Mr. Hill's name especially has been kind of lost to history?
Abram Hill was responsible for laying the foundation where a Ruby Dee, a Sidney Poitier, a Harry Belafonte could flourish, to be noticed beyond Harlem. And so the focus became not where they came from, but where they were at that particular time. And they became the celebrities. So what he could not do is to keep the family together.
Mr. Rivers describes it the same way Professor Caretha Mitchell did. Stars were born, and in some ways, they left Abram Hill and Black theater behind. Keeping the family together, as Mr. Rivers puts it, is just as hard today as it was back then.
A number of the younger actors have gone to schools, and they're not teaching them the history of Black theater. They're teaching them the history of theaters on Broadway, plays on Broadway, by white directors and white actors getting all these awards and accolades.
Wow.
When they come to a community-based theater, we don't have those resources to pay them to come in enjoying to be a part of something. So as a result, it's like we are a bus stop on the way to something else.
When I bought a signed print by painter Jacob Lawrence, it sparked my curiosity and sent me down a rabbit hole that led me from Jacob Lawrence to Abram Hill, from Harlem's Schomburg Library to the American Negro Theater. I'm Tremaine Lee, and this is the story of 4 figures from Harlem who defined Blackness for themselves and what it means to be Black in America today. Harlem on My Mind, a special Into America miniseries. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every Thursday in February.